Risk-based audit has the objective of helping us to set the priorities and to determine what should be included in this year's audit schedule. The idea is that by doing risk-based audit, in other words, ensuring that our audit plan and audit strategy is based on the risk to the organization, we will be able to minimize the risk of an audit failure during the execution of the audit. Risk-based audit will also help us with testing. It'll help us to determine whether or not we should do substantive or compliance testing, as well as the level of testing that will be required in order to provide assurance to management of the appropriateness of our controls. This ensures that we have determined the nature and extent of the testing that will be performed. When there is a higher level of risk, then obviously the level of testing must be more thorough and possibly more in-depth. The criteria then for risk-based audit is, first of all, as always, to understand the business and business risk. We have to understand what is the risk to the business before we can understand how to set out our IS audit strategy or how to even determine the risk to an individual information system. We also know that some risk is more significant than others, and performing a risk-based audit assessment should help us determine the weighting for the types of risk and therefore the priorities of then the audit plan. When we take a risk-based audit approach, we go through a series of steps. The first one is to gather information, everything we can about the organization, and put together, based on that information, an audit plan. We will then attempt to gain an understanding of the internal controls in place, both those which are in place and those, of course, that are planned or in development. We will then perform compliance tests to make sure that staff and processes are compliant with the policies and procedures that have been mandated for that group. We may then also perform substantive tests to ensure that we have correct information on which to base our audit findings and report. Once this is finished and we've done our analysis, we will conclude the audit, leading, of course, to the reporting to management on what was actually found during the preparation and completion of the audit. There are a number of types of audit risk we must be aware of as auditors. Audit risk itself is defined as the risk that a material error will go undetected. Something happened, we didn't see it. And therefore, during the performance of the audit, we did not arrive at the correct conclusions and, quite possibly, even delivered incorrect information in the audit report. There are a number of factors that lead then to audit risk. The first of these factors is the inherent risk within the process itself. The inherent risk is the level of risk within that business process that we are auditing without consideration of the controls. An area, for example, that deals with cash has a higher level of inherent risk just by the nature of the type of business process it is. We also have the risk that a control does not work adequately or effectively. A control was put in place that is not being successful in mitigating the risk as intended or expected. This would be then determined to be a control risk. Detection risk is where the auditor made a mistake. Quite simply, it's the risk that an error or misstatement wasn't detected by the auditor. A very serious case of this is where the auditor, for example, had uncovered a fraud but was unable to notice that this was an actual ongoing fraud. This is a detection risk. And finally, the overall audit risk, which is a combination of all of the risks we've looked at, is that examination. What is the probability that the reports or information that is provided as a part of this audit, whether in gathering the evidence, analyzing the evidence, or in reporting to management, may contain undetected errors of a material or significant nature? So how can we reduce audit risk? One way is to use an appropriate sample size, so that hopefully the sample size of the number of transactions, activities, or operations we've examined would correctly reflect then operational needs and norms as well. And to use quality control to ensure that we've put in place controls to validate that the audit analysis, data gathered, and reporting were accurate to the best of our ability. With risk assessment and audit planning, risk assessment then will help us put together an effective audit plan. The reason we would do this is because we will never have enough resources to do everything that needs to be done. We need to allocate, utilize, and optimize our audit resources, our people, and of course time effectively. We also want to ensure that audit is focused on high-risk activities, those things that are most significant or most likely to have a serious impact on the organization. Using a risk assessment should also help us establish a basis for managing the audit department. Is the audit department effectively providing the information to management that is required? And finally, it'll help us to ensure the alignment of each individual audit with the overall business and audit plans.